Thanks for joining. We're going to talk briefly about several different things we can do to winterize. And, I know the snow is a little bit unnerving, but it's going to be, close to 70 at the end of the week. And it'll be sort of, as always, it's New England weather. You really have until around Thanksgiving to get a system in place. And even then there's some wiggle room. I don't think it's too early, but given that it's going to be warm in the next week and who knows what after that, might just want to wait. The first thing I'm going to talk about are quilt boxes. And quilt boxes are a system that I think originated with the Warre hive, the people's hive. This little hive here, this one here is a Warre. It's part of one anyway. And it's a cute little system, and it's sort of the combination between a Langstroth and a top bar. The frames are almost always just top bar frames, not all the way around, but I have seen them starting to be built all the way around. But the bees build down as they do from a top bar, and it's very compact. But the thing that showed up with the Warre is this box underneath the top here. This one. This was a box that was designed to put shavings in or leaves or whatever, anything that would soak up the moisture, because the Warre, I suppose, if this is really where it originated, he knew that moisture. There's gallons of moisture being exhaled by the bees over winter, and one of the biggest dangers to bees in the wintertime is excess moisture that then melts and rains down on the bees when it's warmer and then gets cold again and such. So moisture really needs to be handled. Most beekeepers, have always just well, a long time ago they would do all kinds of things like haul them into root cellars and places like that. But I've heard stories of beekeepers up in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont and New Hampshire who don't even use bottom boards, and the bees are out there, and if a bee dies, it hits the snow. So I don't know. Maybe it's apocryphal, but anyway, that's where the system kind of originated, at least in my mind. So what people are doing now are building their own. There's something that looks more like this here. So I've taken a medium box and I've drilled a couple holes in it. This one's a bit low, but and filled it with wood and put it pull the membrane of material along the bottom, and you can see where the bars were underneath there, and then filled it with wood shavings. And the idea is that the wood shavings keep the bees warm, right? And the cloth and the wood shavings themselves allow that moisture that rises to actually wick up into the wood shavings and then dissipate. Having the holes here allows the wind that's constantly blowing in the winter to sort of help evaporate I imagine that painting this a darker color might be helpful, actually, come to think of it, because I know we heat this area up even more and help to wick away that moisture. Sometimes in the spring you can sort of bury your fingers in here and feel the warmth of the bees, and I've never really felt it wet, but I have pulled it off and seen it sort of wet spots underneath. So it's really a very simple system. I use canvas on the bottom. That's my favorite. Cloth is just any, like an old bed sheet or something like that. I used burlap last year, and you can see the bees picked their way right through it. And when I opened it up, there were a lot of wood shavings in the hive, and this little hole going through that looked like a mouse hole and some bees up above. I think they love to pick at any kind of little fiber or anything. They're always cleaning, right? So you want a pretty smooth surface. I haven't seen this in any of the sheet material that I've used or canvas. So I'm going to rebuild this one, and I want to save the shavings. So I'm going to and getting very warm in the sun here. The thing about using these boxes, well, there's quite a few holes in there. You can see the bees were quite busy in the spring. The thing about these is you can take that material off and use it as a honey super. So it's an all-season house, used all the time. All right, so I'm going to pop the bottom off of this and then put another one on. And as I put the other one on, I'll sort of show you what I did. Okay, the old one's off.
Hey Phil, can
That's what I've been using.
you tilt the screen down just a tiny bit so we could see what you're doing?
Oh, you don't really want to see it. It's pretty messy, but and I'm taking out some of the old that are protruding, but I'm going to leave some of them in for speed, for time's sake. So here's a piece of bed sheet, and you see, are you lined up right?
Yeah, that's it. Perfect.
Okay. You have to get this pretty tight, but the tighter the better, but not extraordinarily tight. You don't want it like a drum. All right. So I'm using 3/8 inch staples. If you use a thicker material like canvas, you might want to, or these are 1/4 inch for bed sheet. 3/8 might be better for canvas, but if you put enough in, I would put maybe 5 along each side, and maybe and then finish off with 2 at either end, something like that. I don't like to leave any material hanging out the side because I'm worried about wicking. That if it gets wet, it'll wick into the hive. So I try and get it. I try and cut it just a little bit inside where the edge is. Having breakfast. Sounds like someone's
I
having.
know. Maybe people can mute themselves.
All right, so there's my drum, right? Pretty simple. Now, I end up putting that right on the, I put that right on the frames. So what I'll do is I'll take the outer cover off and then the inner cover, and I'll put it right down on the bees. So you can see that that's the orientation, because of, you can see where the frames were under here. But I also do a little thing in the middle where, yep, I'll take a bottle cap, and a bigger one is probably better, but this is just from, water bottle. And I'll take some wire. I'll just sort of make a little knot on the end of the wire, like so. And I'll poke it up through the bottle cap like that, so that the upper part of the bottle cap is facing, it's going to be like this, right? So, I'm sorry, reverse that. Sorry, you want the bottle cap facing, very good. Okay, and then I'll find the approximate middle and poke it through there. And then I'll take a top bar, and any stick will do as long as it's pretty secure, right? So I put the top bar in, and I pulled up, so I'm creating like a little teepee under there. I'm pulling up on that fabric. So I do this because when I fill it with wood shavings, they have a bit of weight to them, right? And if I put the wood shavings in and put it on the bees, it would sort of smother all the bees that are on the top of the frame, and it wouldn't really give them a place to collect. Now, it does create some space, that's sort of dead space. And the least amount of dead space you have, the better, because the bees have to heat up any space that's in there, right? So, but I figure this is better than letting it sag down and crush the bees, or sort of, I don't know, smother, crush. It's not really going to harm them if you don't use it, but I like it. I prefer it. And then what you would do is, and you could do this before or after, but these holes here are pretty important. The thing you want to keep in mind is that when you put your inner cover and outer cover on, you don't want this hole to be so high that it's going to be covered by the rim of the outer cover, right? So measure it first. I think this line here was where I measured the edge of the outer cover, and I just put the hole right below it, or a little bit below it. And then you want to screen it. See how I put some screen with thumbtacks on the inside? I don't know if I'm showing that. Yeah, okay. So that keeps, critters from getting in there. It's a nice warm spot, so you want to keep them out. And then you fill it with shavings, and we'll just, I have shavings here if you need some. People with chickens often use them for their coops. So, let's see. It's about 3 pounds. Yeah, almost 4 pounds of shavings. And I sort of push it in. I make it kind of tight. I don't press too hard, but remember when we first looked at this box, it looked like it was about half full of shavings, and now it looks like it's overflowing. What I have noticed is that there's if there's ever signs of moisture in the hive underneath the quilt box, when I pull it off, it's usually around the edges. So I used to tuck it in a lot around the corners. Sorry, I used to tuck it in a lot around the corners, but I think what I'll do is sort of make a dome instead. So I'll leave it a little less tucked in on the corner and more up in the top. And that's it. Again, you would put and make sure there's that the holes, the ventilation holes are aren't completely covered.
Hey,
And
Bill,
that's
can I ask
pretty,
can I ask a
sure.
question about whether or not do you ever swap out the shavings or supplement them at any point, or is it just the one-shot deal? You put the shavings in and let them go the season with it?
Yeah, I once that's on, they're on their own. But what were you thinking of with what could I swap it out with?
No, I was just wondering if at any point, like if you've ever just, if it's been like,
Oh, because it's
if you've
so
got,
wet.
yeah, if it's gotten
Okay,
really
yeah.
wet, or you've had like a really like thaw, like freeze, if you've ever had any problems with having to do any kind of exchange or anything like that.
Yeah, I've never gone in there in the in midwinter and felt any issues. I sort of bury my fingers in there and you can kind of feel if there's an issue or not. Never sopping wet. No. So
Okay, thanks.
Bill,
um, yeah.
Bill, have you ever seen issues with like moisture or mold up there in the shavings?
Um,
Like, come spring.
yeah. I mean, yeah. I think I mentioned that there was that I noticed in a couple of them. Neither of these two, but I did see one from last winter that looked like it had a little bit of moisture mold in the corners. I mean, mold happens all the time in beehives, so and they clean it up quite well. They seem perfectly resistant to any kind of mold that appears to grow in a beehive. Um, where I saw it was in the corners. I suppose because they were mostly in the middle, that's where the heat was going, and the corners were kind of cooler and damper. So that's why I was suggesting maybe to help the corners ventilate a little more, maybe pull the shavings away from the corner of the box a little bit, but make sure there's, I mean, you got to have some there. So this is almost 4 inches deep and maybe 3 inches at the corner. I don't know. I'm splitting hairs here. So, but anyway, what was I going to recommend? Yeah, I mean, once that goes on, that's it. Some people like to use shims. A shim is any kind of spacer, basically. And especially if you consider feeding, you don't have to have this on now, and I might recommend not putting it on now. But anyway, this is a basic shim, and I just made it out of wood. I got it at the hardware store, and if it's imagine these are the frames and the bees, and it would fit sort of right on top. Now there's a 10 frame shim on an 8 frame box, but anyway, it provides a little extra space. And if these were the frames, you could lay some newspaper on there and pour some sugar on and feed them that way if you wanted to. Or if you had cakes of fondant, you could just lay it in that space, and that it's basically gives you space to add feed. Right. A couple things I forgot. One is that I built this box just from wood I bought at the hardware store. And because you're not using your hive tool on it, there's no stress on the sides or anything. So you can build it any way you want as long as it's fairly tight. I will often, if I go into beehives when it's cooler or when the temperatures are expected to dip and I've cracked the seal between the boxes, sometimes I'll take some painter's tape and just wrap it right around the seal because the bees won't have time to propolize it shut. So it just helps keep the moisture out. Right? One more thing. Oh, in the wintertime, And you can do this almost anytime. It doesn't have to be a warm day. You can open up the top and you're not going to be releasing a lot of heat if you have your quilt box on, and you can kind of bury your fingers in there and feel around a little bit. It's sort of fun sometimes. But earlier in the winter, they're going to be lower down. It's not until spring that they kind of move their way up to the last bits of honey. So quilt box, shim, and then something I do sometimes, I did it last year and the bees survived, but there are many reasons why they do and don't survive. But one of my hives had some extra space. It just wasn't completely tight, and actually it had quite a lot of space. And so I made this. It's sort of like a follower board that you would find in a topper hive, and I just put it. I made it basically it's a 2x10. And it works perfectly. I didn't have to trim it at all. I just cut it to the width of a frame. No, I'm sorry, I cut it to the width of a box. So I cut it, the frames are, I forget how wide, but there's that 3/8" bee space on either side, but I cut this to fit right against the wall of either side of the box and slipped it in. And it just created a thicker wall, more, more insulation. And also it eliminated that space that the bees would otherwise have to heat up. So really simple to make. I did run a little piece of wood along the top and notched it, but it fits in perfectly.
So Bill, will you have
Yeah.
all these things for us to purchase from you?
Well, a lot of this stuff you can make yourself, but I have wood shavings. What else would you need? I have extra top bars if you need one. I have some of this wood, the 2x10s. I found a lot of scrap 2x10 a couple days ago, and I have tar paper, and I'm going to show you how to wrap a hive in a minute. So I think that's it. I have shims that are pre-cut that you can put together, or I can make one for you if you let me know. So yeah, okay. So
Bill, could I ask you a quick question?
sure, yeah.
What's the? I'm a little confused about the shim.
Oh, yeah.
What's the purpose of the shim, and what are the dimensions of the shim?
Right. Well, the shim, I maybe have used a shim once or twice. If you're feeding the bees, you can't just put the feed in there and close it up because there's no space. The feed takes up some room. I mean, if you're feeding liquid feed, you can use a frame feeder that fits right into the hive. But if you're using a fondant or a solid feed, which you use in the wintertime, because it doesn't create as much of a moisture issue, then the shim just gives you an extra little bit of space to put that in, to put it in there, right? So let's see.
So, Bill, could you say what the sequence is in terms of where is the inner cover if you have a shim and if you have a quilt box?
Right. The quilt box goes right over the bees, as you can see. So,
You wouldn't have your shim over the bees?
sorry? Come again?
You would have your shim with the feed over the bees, right?
I would have the feed under the bees
Yep.
and in the shim, in that space that's created by the shim. So
And where is the inner cover? At the very top?
above everything. Yeah.
Yep, okay.
Let me
Thank you.
Sure. Actually, I can show you both of I can answer both of those questions at once. So I'm sure you can see that. Can you see the?
Yeah, that's perfect.
The
Good,
inner
okay.
cover, the opening on the inner cover, should it be facing up or down? Could you just review that, Bill?
Hey, remind me in a minute. Let me finish up Seamus and Mary Beth's question. So there's my shim right on top. And I'm gonna use this space here. It's 1.5 inches to lay newspaper or blocks of fondant, which basically is like a giant sugar cube, right? And I'm going to put that in there, and the bees will be able to access it directly. So I put it
Wait,
above the
sorry,
inner.
did you say newspaper?
Yeah, or any kind of paper. Brown paper's fine. Something that will hold the sugar so it doesn't filter down and rain on the bees. So I think I sent an email around about 6 weeks ago with a link to a guy who just, he says, I've been making fondant for years. I've burned how many, kitchen curtains and burned holes in my pants. And I found the best recipe of all. I take a 5-pound bag of sugar and some newspaper, and I go out to the hive and I put the newspaper down, I cut the bag open, and I close it up. And that's a little simplistic, but if you lay some strips of newspaper along there, and then pile on the sugar, allowing, because you're laying strips, you leave a little space in between each one, and it allows the bees to come up and access the sugar. So you want to fill it up. Again, you want to cut down on the amount of extra space that's up there. And this is something you probably wouldn't do till springtime, because they have plenty of honey for now. But you lay some strips of newspaper down and make little piles of. Okay, I have 10 minutes. There's a reminder here. So anyway, any questions? Is that pretty clear?
Then you just put the quilt box right on top of that shim.
Yeah. Right. Now, I'm going to start putting these out in a couple of weeks, probably. My quilt boxes. I won't have the shim. Right. I'll just open up my hive, take off the inner and outer cover, and I'll put this right on top. I'll make sure this is a little bit, it's not even there at all. So I'm going to pull that up. I'm going to put another bottle cap under there and pull that up. But when it goes down on the bees, you won't squish any of the bees if you have that little tenting that we did here, right? So, all right. And you had a question. What was it?
So and I think someone else brought it up, but on the inner cover, that goes on,
Right.
yeah, the notch. Is it facing up or down?
I'm gonna put it up, or I could put it down, but you want to screen it again for the same reason you screen the holes. So I have misgivings about not allowing the bees some of their own ventilation. Like, I would love to give them an inner cover right above the colony, because they're very good about plugging the hole and propylizing it or whatever to keep the heat and the moisture balanced. But I figure those shavings do such a good job at allowing the moisture to wick away, and I think I've never had an issue. So yes, I'm sorry. Long story short, I put it above everything. If you put it down, I would definitely screen it so that critters don't get in again. If you put it up, and I don't know what's going to get in this time of year, but you never know. If you put it up, you probably don't need to. So, but I would allow it to ventilate, right? So you know how the top shifts forward and backwards to close up that hole or keep it open. I would keep it in the forward position so that just helps ventilate that much more. Okay, wrapping. I have about 8 minutes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
So I never used to wrap. Just pretend this is a regular old beehive. I actually, a long time ago, I was wrapping, and then I stopped wrapping because somebody said, "Oh no, it creates this roller coaster of temperatures in there." And then the same person, who I consider the best beekeeper around, she said, "Well, actually, it allows the bees. It does heat up the hive a little bit, and it allows the bees to, if they're in cluster, but their honey is somewhere else, which happens. They sort of work their way up one part of the hive, and the honey's on the other side. It's really cold, and they can't move over to find it. So by allowing the hive to heat up a little bit, it allows them to break cluster a little and move around in the daytime. I think it's like ideally, if you can keep the bees at 40 to 43 degrees, that's perfect because they're not buzzing around a lot, but they're not using so much energy to keep themselves warm. But we can't have that all the time. So I use tar paper again year after year, and I just keep it folded up in the summertime, and then when I'm ready, I pull it out. And I think this might not be. Oh yeah, this is good. So just one wrap around. That's all you need, really. And because the bottom board creates a little ledge there, I just rest it right on top of the. Sorry, can you see that? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes.
I
Yes.
just put it on top there, and then to get it started, yeah, I'll put a little tack there. Just to kind of keep it straight as I go around. If when you get your tar paper, if you decide to use it, if you can crease it before you bring it around, sort of pre-measure it and crease it at least sort of one edge at a time, it goes on so much easier. So again, this is from last year because it's already creased. It goes on perfectly. But I think I put it on wrong. There we go. The tack, you can tack it or staple it or whatever. I just tack it and tie it. Personal preference. Now, what I'm noticing here is that, well, it's too high, so I would have to trim this down, right? But I want to, when I trim it, I want to get it sort of below or right around where the inner cover is. And then when I put the outer cover on, it'll fit snugly over it. So, so I would sort of manipulate this a little bit, probably take a utility knife and cut it. I also will cut a hole where the ventilation hole is in the quilt box. So if the ventilation hole is right about here, I'll poke a hole and cut it out. You can see one here. So this was on a bigger hive apparently, and then I'll wrap it with rope. But you can, each to their own. But I just go around a few times with the rope and I'm done. So, and the reason why this one didn't come around all the way is for one of two reasons. Either it's because I'm cheap or because it was a beehive that was facing south, and I thought, well, if I wrap the north and east and west, then it'll get the sun at the south facing sun. So any more questions? I think that's pretty much it.
So you would wrap it the whole way, not what you did there, but normally you would.
Normally, yeah, I think normally I do. Yeah, but not always. Sometimes if I have a beehive that's painted dark, I might leave it open even more. I might actually, last year I had a dark one on the bottom and I only wrapped the top boxes, and that dark one, absorbed lots of heat. So, yeah, and play around with it.
Hey, Bill, what's your opinion on just burlap as a?
Well, so maybe you weren't.
And I'm sorry, I jumped in late.
Oh, okay. So this is some burlap from last year, and it's completely shredded. The bees just picked it apart. They love to pick away at little fibers and hairs and things, and they're always cleaning. So they probably had a few warm days in the spring, and I didn't get the quilt box off in time, and they went to work on it. So, so I would use, sheet material. Canvas is great.
So do you have the canvas and the tar paper, or should we get
I
that
don't
somewhere?
have canvas. I could go buy some canvas, so maybe I'll do that. But canvas should be washed because a lot of it's treated with something. So make sure you wash it. If you go and buy like painter's tarps or a canvas painter tarp, I think sometimes they have like starches and stuff in there. I'm not sure. So I would just give it a wash first.
Bill, could I ask another question?
Sure.
And sorry to repeat on the shim. The
Yeah.
shim is only necessary if you decide to feed. If you decide
right.
you're not going to feed, you don't need the shim, right?
That's right. Yeah. And you certainly don't need it now. It would be something you need later. Yeah. A
That'd
lot of them have holes
be
in
for feeding in
for
the spring.
spring. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Again, I'm not a shim expert. I don't use them that much. I only use the closed ones for feeding, but I've seen open ones. I'm not sure if they're used in the summer for extra, access or what. I don't know.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, sure.
Bill, on wrapping the hives, do you want to leave open that inner cover vent hole?
Yeah. Yeah. Any holes you want to leave open. Yeah. So just cut a little opening there. We're in the tar paper.
It's okay to wrap all the way around and just leave, just those vent holes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kind of following up on Kim's question.
Okay. Yeah.